The body was found on a cold January morning in 1947. A woman walking with her child in a Los Angeles neighborhood saw what she thought was a mannequin. It was lying in a vacant lot, pale and broken. But it wasn't a mannequin. It was the body of a young woman. She had been cut in two at the waist. Her body was drained of blood. It was clean. Someone had washed her, and her face was carved into a gruesome, permanent smile. This was the murder of Elizabeth Short. The press called her the Black Dahlia. Her killer was never found. The case is still open. It's one of America's great unsolved mysteries. And over the decades, a central question has haunted everyone who looks at the case. Was her killer a random monster, a stranger who snatched her off the streets? Or was it someone she knew, someone she trusted, maybe even loved? This is the jealous lover angle. It's the idea that the rage and precision of the murder came from a place of deep personal connection. A connection that soured into something monstrous. To understand this theory, you have to understand Elizabeth Short. She wasn't just a famous victim, she was a person. She was 22 years old, she came from Massachusetts. She had dreams of becoming a movie star, like so many others who flocked to Hollywood. You know, she was striking, with dark hair and pale skin. She often wore black, which is where the nickname Black Dahlia came from, a play on a popular movie at the time, The Blue Dahlia. Elizabeth's life was complicated. She drifted, she didn't have a steady job or a permanent home. She moved from one cheap apartment to another. She relied on the kindness and the money of men she met. She had a lot of men in her life. She wrote letters to dozens of soldiers during the war. She went on dates. She was charming and knew how to get men to pay for her meals, her rent, her train tickets. This has led to a lot of myths. People said she was a prostitute, but the police and the FBI investigated this thoroughly. They found no evidence she ever sold herself for sex. She wasn't a prostitute. She was a young woman trying to survive. She was looking for a protector, a husband, a way into the life she dreamed of. Her relationships were transactional in a way, but the currency was companionship and the promise of affection, not sex for cash. She was building a network. She hoped one of these men would be her ticket. Her most significant relationship was with a man named Major Matt Gordon, Jr. He was an Army Air Force pilot. They were reportedly engaged. But he was killed in a plane crash in India before he could return home. His death devastated her. Some say she never recovered. She carried his obituary in her wallet. After his death, her life became even more aimless. She drifted from city to city, from man to man, maybe searching for something she had lost with him. This web of relationships is the foundation of the jealous lover theory. The police had to track down every man she had ever known, dated, or even just written a letter to. The list was enormous, and in that list they believed was her killer. A man who felt used or rejected or betrayed. The crime itself seems to scream of personal rage. The most horrific detail, besides the bisection, was the Glasgow smile. The killer had taken a knife and sliced her mouth from ear to ear. It's a deeply personal form of mutilation. It's an attack on her face, her identity, her beauty. It feels like an act of hatred. A stranger might kill for thrill or opportunity, but to defile a face like that, well, that feels like something else. It feels like someone is saying, you will never smile at another man again. It's an act of possessive, destructive fury. Then there's the fact that her body was cleaned. The killer took the time to drain the blood and wash her hair and skin. This wasn't a messy, frantic murder in an alley. It happened somewhere private, somewhere the killer had control. A house, an apartment, a motel room. This suggests Elizabeth went with her killer willingly. She wasn't dragged off the street. She trusted him enough to go with him. For that to happen, she probably knew him. There's also the missing week. The last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Short was on January 9th. Her body was found on January 15th. For about 6 days, she vanished. Where was she? Who was she with? Police believe she was held captive during this time. The medical examiner determined she had been dead for only about 10 hours when her body was found. So, for most of that week, she was alive. Who held her? A stranger would have a hard time keeping someone captive for days without anyone noticing. But a lover, a boyfriend, an acquaintance, she might have stayed with him willingly at first. Maybe the situation only turned violent at the end. The list of suspects who fit this profile is long. The first and most obvious was Robert Ed Manley. He was a married salesman who was the last person known to have seen her alive. He picked her up in San Diego and drove her to Los Angeles. He said she was meeting her sister at the Biltmore Hotel. They checked his luggage at the bus station, and he said he left her in the hotel lobby. He went home to his wife and family. Manley was questioned relentlessly. He was the prime suspect. But he passed multiple lie detector tests. His story never changed. He had a solid alibi for the time of the murder. The police eventually cleared him. but he always remained a person of interest. Could he have lied? Could he have been more involved than just a friendly driver? Maybe. But the evidence wasn't there. He was just the last man in a long line of men. A more compelling suspect was Mark Hansen. Hansen was a wealthy nightclub and movie theater owner. He was a powerful figure in Hollywood circles. Elizabeth Short knew him. In fact, she had stayed at his home for a short time, along with several other young women. Hansen was known to be infatuated with her. He made advances, she turned him down. This gives him a classic mode of rejection. Hansen's name was in the address book the killer later mailed to the police. Well, he was a major suspect. The police interviewed him many times. He acted strangely. He was evasive, he had an alibi, but it wasn't airtight. Some investigators believed he was the killer, or at least knew who did it. The theory goes that Elizabeth rejected him, and in a fit of rage, he killed her. Or perhaps she was blackmailing him about some of his shady business dealings. As a powerful man with connections, he would have had the resources to commit the murder and cover it up. He had a private place where it could have happened. He fit the profile of a spurned, powerful man. But again, there was no physical evidence to link him to the crime. The case against him was purely circumstantial. The investigation took a darker turn when it focused on men with medical training. The bisection of her body was clean. It was a specific kind of cut called a hemicorporectomy. It's a procedure taught in medical school in the 1930s and 40s to sever the spine between two specific vertebrae. A butcher, or a random person, would likely hack the body apart. This was precise. This suggested a surgeon, or at least someone with anatomical knowledge. This led police to investigate doctors and medical students at the University of Southern California, which was near where the body was found. They questioned many, but none stuck. Over the years, however, one name has come to dominate this line of inquiry: Dr. George Hodel. The case against George Hodel is a story in itself. It was brought to public attention by his own son, Steve Hodel, a retired lap-dead homicide detective. After his father's death, Steve began investigating and became convinced his father was the Black Dahlia killer. He wrote a book laying out his evidence, and it is chilling. George Hodel was a brilliant doctor. He had a genius IQ. He ran a venereal disease clinic in Los Angeles. He was also a part of the surrealist art scene in Hollywood. He knew famous artists like Man Ray. He threw lavish parties at his unique architect-designed house. He was charismatic, but he had a very dark side. He was accused of sexually abusing his own daughter, Tamar. In fact, that case went to trial, and it was a huge scandal. He was acquitted, but many believed he was guilty. His son, Steve, argues that the Dahlia murder happened shortly after this trial. He believes his father killed Elizabeth Short as an act of rage and revenge against women after being publicly accused by his daughter. The potential connection to Elizabeth Short is there. Hodel lived in Hollywood. He ran in the same circles. There are witness statements that place them together. Steve Hodel believes his father and Elizabeth had a relationship, and that she rejected him or threatened to expose his dark secrets. The evidence Steve Hodel presents is compelling, if circumstantial. He found photos in his father's private album of a woman who looked strikingly like Elizabeth Short. He argues that the surgical skill matches his father's training. His father's handwriting, according to some experts, is a match for the taunting notes the killer sent to the press. Perhaps the most disturbing piece of evidence comes from the Lapte's own files. In 1950, the police bugged George Hodel's house during a different investigation. The transcripts of the recordings survive. On the tapes, Hodel can be heard talking to an unknown person. He says things like, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." He also mentions performing abortions, which was illegal at the time, and other criminal activities. The tapes suggest a man capable of extreme violence and devoid of remorse. So, George Hodel fits the profile. He knew her, or likely knew her. He was a doctor with the skills to perform the bisection. He had a documented dark side and a potential motive rooted in his own psychological turmoil. He had a private home where the crime could have occurred. The case his son builds is the most complete theory about any single suspect. It paints a picture of a brilliant but monstrous man who saw Elizabeth Short as an object to be possessed and, when he couldn't have her, an object to be destroyed. This is the ultimate jealous lover, or, perhaps more accurately, the spurned predator theory. Beyond these main suspects, there were dozens of others. The police files are filled with the names of men Elizabeth knew. Soldiers she wrote to, men she dated briefly, barflies she met for a drink. Could one of them have been the killer? A soldier who came home from the war, obsessed with the girl from the letters, only to find she wasn't who he thought she was. A man she went on one date with, who became enraged when she didn't want a second. The sheer number of men in her life made the investigation a nightmare. It was hard to know which connections were meaningful and which were just fleeting. But the killer was likely in that haystack of names. The crime feels too personal, too specific, to be the work of a complete stranger. The killer didn't just want her dead. He wanted to obliterate her. He wanted to make a statement. The killer's communications with the press add another layer. About a week after the murder, the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner received a phone call. The man on the line said he was the killer. He said he was going to turn himself in. He also expressed concern that the news was scaring his victim's mother to death. He said he would mail some of Elizabeth's belongings to the paper to prove it was him. He did. A package arrived. Inside was Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, her social security card, business cards, and an address book with Mark Hansen's name on the covers. There were also photos and other personal items. The items had all been wiped clean with gasoline to remove fingerprints. The killer also sent a series of taunting, cut and paste letters to the police and the press. This behavior is not typical of a simple crime of passion. A jealous lover might kill in a fit of rage and then feel remorse or panic. This killer was cold, calculating, and arrogant. He was playing a game with the police. He was enjoying his infamy. Does this contradict the jealous lover theory? Not necessarily. The rage of the murder itself and the cold calculation of the aftermath can coexist. The murder could have been the explosion of personal fury. The cleanup, the posing of the body, the letters, that could have been the killer regaining his composure and deciding to turn his personal act of vengeance into a public spectacle. He had destroyed her, and now he wanted the world to see his work. He was in control. It was the ultimate act of possession. Of course, there are strong arguments against the theory that her killer was someone she knew. The main one is the idea of a serial killer. The bisection of the body is similar to a series of unsolved murders in Cleveland in the 1930s, known as the Cleveland Torso Murders. The killer in that case was never caught. Some have speculated that the same person moved to Los Angeles and killed Elizabeth Short. In this scenario, she was just a victim of opportunity. The killer was a predator who hunted transients and people on the fringes of society. He didn't need a personal motive. The act of killing and dissecting was the motive itself. The problem with this theory is that the Black Dahlia murder seems to be a one-off event in Los Angeles. If it was a serial killer, where are the other victims? There were other unsolved murders of women around that time, but none had the unique, bizarre signatures of the Dahlia case. The clean bisection, the Glasgow smile, the taunting letters. It stands alone. The lack of any definitive evidence is the reason the case remains unsolved. There was no murder weapon. There was no crime scene ever found. Forensic science in 1947 was primitive compared to today. There was no DNA testing. The investigation relied on shoe leather detective work, interviews, and instinct. And with a victim like Elizabeth Short, who had so many connections but so few deep roots, the trail quickly went cold. Every man who was seriously investigated had an alibi, or passed the lie detector test, or simply had no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Mark Hansen, Robert Manley, even George Hodel, the police could never build a strong enough case to take to a prosecutor. All we are left with is speculation. But the jealous lover angle, or more broadly, the known acquaintance angle, remains the most persuasive. It just makes the most sense of the crime's strange details, the personal rage etched on her face. The trust she must have placed in her killer to go with him for that final week. The private location needed for such a gruesome and methodical act. It all points to a relationship that ended in the most horrific way imaginable. The tragedy of the Black Dahlia is not just that she was murdered. It's that her life has been completely overshadowed by her death. She's remembered as a puzzle, a set of gruesome facts. But she was a young woman with hopes and fears, just trying to find her place in the world. She made connections with people, she put her trust in them, and the evidence strongly suggests that one of those people, a man she knew by name, betrayed that trust in the most final and brutal way. We will likely never know for sure who killed her. The names of the suspects are now just names in old police files. They are all long dead. The secrets they held are gone with them, but when you look at the photograph of the real Elizabeth Short, the one where she's smiling, with a flower in her hair, it's hard to shake the feeling that she knew her killer. The face she saw in her final moments was not the face of a stranger. It was the face of someone who had once, perhaps, made her smile. And that is the most chilling thought of all. The monster wasn't a phantom in the shadows. He was someone who had sat across a table from her, someone who knew her name, and someone whose rage was so personal it was carved into her skin forever.